Now we are going to have Angela Lungati from Ushahidi, and I just wanted to briefly introduce her so that you know more about her. So Angela Lungati is a technologist, community builder, and an open source software advocate. She is passionate about building and using appropriate technology tools to create impact in the lives of marginalized groups. She has over 10 years of experience, and she currently serves as an executive director at Ushahidi, a global nonprofit technology company that builds technology for democratizing information, increasing transparency, and lowering barriers for individuals to raise their voices. She was also a director of community engagement, where she created and managing programs for Ushahidi's diverse global community. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Angela to the stage so that she could tell us more about Ushahidi and how they are accomplishing their mission of giving voices to the population. Just give us 1 minute. Meanwhile, I would like to just read a very interesting phrase from Angela, which is marginalized communities tend to be left out of meaningful conversations, leading in decisions that are not fully representative of their needs. This happens all over the world. We are talking about Africa, but even the project of Ushahidi is applied all over the world in very different situations, from showing their voices to the government to showing their voices to foundations that want to support when, for example, there is a hurricane and these foundations have to help the populations. So the applications are very diverse. Our tools, through large-scale data collection and visualization, help those that serve them to listen and respond better. Because what typically happens is that the government or other types of players, they want to help specific type of populations. We could be talking about homelessness. We could be talking about different types of communities that usually are not the large percentage of the crowd. And these same communities, if they don't take place in the decision making, usually what happens is that you're making a decision that by principle is going to have a positive impact in the population, but in reality that might not be the case. So, for example, if we want to help the homelessness population, we should include the homeless in the conversation. What are your problems? Why are you in the streets? What is it preventing you from getting a home or a shelter or coming back to your original life? So all these examples show that it's increasingly more important to include them in the conversations. Angela, I can see you right now. I see that you're muted, but I wanted to also give you the word.
Thank you.
About the beautiful work you're doing in Ushahidi.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. I had a bit of a technical difficulty. All right. So shall I share my screen really quickly? Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
I have a brief presentation that will give you some insights into who we are as Ushahidi, and then we'll step on to then have an ongoing conversation. So once again, thank you for having me. It's definitely an honor to be participating in this year's DSSG Summit. I have been working with Ushahidi for 10 years, and I'm looking forward to sharing insights with you from over a decade of data collection and the value that it brings in fighting for social change. So let me start off with just some historic background. Ushahidi is a Swahili word that means testimony. High tribal tensions marked the Kenyan elections back in 2007. So of course, when results were announced, they were primarily contested, resulting in the breakout of violence across the country. A lot of what was happening on the ground was primarily underreported or not reported at all. So a group of 5 Kenyan bloggers then came together to help ordinary Kenyans to shed light on what was happening around them. They built this platform where people could send in text messages or fill out a web form and have that information aggregated on a map. What you're seeing on the screen right now is a snapshot of what was the very first Ushahidi deployment. They gave Kenyans a voice when no one else could or would, and citizen witnesses became empowered to document violence in their communities, share this information at a global scale, and where possible, actually feed this data to domestic or international investigators and prosecutors working towards accountability for crimes. So who are we? We are a global non-profit technology company that aims to provide people with equal access to technology resources that they need to solve problems in their communities and enact social change effectively. We do that by one of the first things we do is we build open source technology tools that make it much easier for people to understand and respond to critical events quickly. And the premise here is that marginalized communities tend to be left out of meaningful conversations, leading to decision-making that is not fully representative of their needs. Our tools therefore help to raise the voices of these marginalized groups and help those that serve them to listen and respond better. Our flagship product, the Ushahidi platform, is actually an open source crowdsourcing tool that enables efficient data collection via SMS, email, Twitter, smartphone applications, and the web. Also helps with management to help people understand what's happening on the ground with a near real-time feed of data. It also helps with visualization of data, or the visualizing events as they unfold, and supporting effective response. Aside from building the tech itself, we also work really closely with grassroots organizations to help them leverage technology to fight for social justice through training and strategic support. And we do this work through partnering with enterprise partners, and we've also run large-scale implementation programs with international development organizations. For example, there's a project we took on called the Dreams Innovation Challenge, which was a 2-year project geared towards enabling organizations that were working to reduce HIV prevalence amongst young girls to engage directly with their audiences. Now, as the world has become increasingly connected, we've also seen use of the Ushahidi platform grow in that time. In the last 12 years, we've seen the platform used more than 200,000 times in more than 160 countries across various categories of social impact, some of which I'm going to speed through really quickly because I'm also aware of the time that we have. But one of the most notable examples or the most notable areas of social impact that Ushahidi is known for is crisis response, using first-hand information and first-hand data from affected individuals to inform humanitarian response. For example, during the Nepal earthquake in 2015, and most recently to respond to COVID-19. We've seen many communities coming together to self-organize, collecting data to provide mutual aid, document COVID-19 testing experiences, and also to create visibility on where to access essential resources. The second category of social impact that we're mostly known for would be human rights protection. So looking at from tracking sexual harassment against women in Egypt to documenting the protests during the Egyptian Revolution of 2010, really using data as a way of creating awareness around human rights violations around the world. Thirdly, good governance. So really helping to hold duty bearers to account and upholding the integrity of elections and democracies around the world. And last but not least, environmental justice, using data to support fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people in developing, implementing, and enforcing environmental laws. Now, the beautiful thing about this is that this is a tool that we built in Africa, a tool that was born out of problems we always tend to associate with Africa: low bandwidth, bad governance. You know, the world has always imagined Africa as a place that receives technology and innovation, but here we are exporting it. Now, one of the things that we've learned over time is that change is at times compelled by insight. And this insight could definitely lead to behavioral change if we can make the data relevant to individuals, relevant to the decisions that they have to make based on the information that they have at the time, and also having it be a driving force towards data-driven decision-making. It's important to also remember that libraries were built before people could read, and they drove the demand for literacy. They were created to help citizens become literate. And therefore, it makes sense that platforms, data and platforms like Ushahidi exist, even before people become literate in data, just so that we're finding ways to make it much easier for people to understand how to use this data or how relevant it is to them. So when I think about what Ushahidi's role is in all of this is, One, to make sure that the data is accessible, because access is ownership in action. Ushahidi tries to make data accessible because our technology meets our audience where they are, whether you have a smartphone or whether you have an SMS-enabled phone, we're trying to make sure that we are lowering those barriers of access. The second thing that we're also doing is, trying to make this data digestible, making it easy for people to understand and make meaning out of it, because data in its original form is boring, right? And it takes transformations to make it relevant to a particular individual for them to then understand it. But one thing to also keep in mind is that while platforms like Ushahidi are what we would term as fertile land, and having data is like having really good seeds, fertile land and seeds aren't much without people and the hard work that they put into getting produce out of that land. Without people to make use of this data or help provide context, our farms will not flourish. And so it's important to make sure that we are keeping citizen engagement and participation at the center of the quest for social change. It's essential for us to make sure that we are being inclusive of ordinary citizens. So I'm going to end my presentation there, just because I know that we have a very exciting discussion coming up between myself and Anna, and of course the rest of you. So I look forward to many more of those discussions as the session progresses today.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Angela. I think you gave everyone a good overview about Ushahidi, and not just the impact that he had locally, but the impact that he had around the world. And that I think it's very inspiring for either other NGOs that could be seeing us, or people that want to start a journey that is similar or be part of the journey that you are part of.
Absolutely.
Regarding the questions, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, I think it would be interesting to start with a specific example of, or one specific application of the Ushahidi that that you recall that was more inspiring for you, or what if you had to pick one moment about Ushahidi when it was massively utilized or it had a lot of impact, what would be that moment?
Wow. To be honest, I think there's very many examples. So maybe I can give you one that's really close to my heart, and that honestly would be the Kenyan elections. When we think, especially as a Kenyan, when we think back to what happened in 2007, and the possibility of that happening again, it's a very scary thing, right? And so when the opportunity came up in 2010 to volunteer and be a part of just keeping an eye out of the constitutional referendum, I jumped at the opportunity. And here I was a an undergrad student at the time, thinking, wow, this is a technology tool that is really convening people from across different parts of the world, coming together, sitting behind our desks, but really seeing the impact of creating a tool like this, and having that then have a powerful outcome in either helping to ensure that there's a free and fair election. And then seeing that happen again in 2013 and in 2017, that I was able to not only, contribute in a special way as an individual, but also was able to convene people from across different parts of the world to also fight towards ensuring a free and fair outcome of our election. So that's one that, tends to really strike me at the heart.
Yeah, I think that that is a very special use case, especially because basically at the time what you were trying to do was, okay, let's provide the truth, let's provide transparency through the data, through sharing what exactly do people think about these elections. So this is very interesting. And by that time, because that was probably one of the first projects of Ushahidi.
Yeah.
So what kind of obstacles did you have? Because basically the platform only can share the data that is provided to them. So what obstacles did you have in terms of convincing people, showing people that their data actually was very powerful, especially if gathered in the same place?
All right. So one of the first things I need to do is clarify that while there have been several instances where we as a Ushahidi team have been involved in collecting data with the tools that we've built, our primary focus has been on developing the tools that the social change agents can use. So of the 200,000 that are out there, you can count, the number that Ushahidi has been actively involved in, just because we want to make sure that the tool is working out well. That said, from our experience and also what we've learned from our community of users, most of the challenges have revolved around, one, a lack of understanding of the overall goals and how these impact their lives. And that's likely just, due to them not having access to the information. They don't understand what the overall goal of the project is. So there's a lot of confusion about why do I even need to participate? The second one is fear of retribution, especially in sensitive and tense situations. For example, if it's projects revolving around human rights protection or even elections, they tend to be very charged. People are afraid of being victimized based on their opinions or the data that they're sharing. And the third one, which is one that's likely the biggest one, is really disillusionment and apathy because of inaction or a lack of trust in the decision-making process and the systems. However, what we found to be helpful in addressing these challenges include, one, being very clear at the onset, articulating the overall strategy and the goals of the different projects and making sure that you're creating awareness around them. And that will mean that you really have to understand who these audiences are, understand where they communicate and what channels to use. So, it might be making use of radio campaigns, it might be making use of television, or, just even word of mouth, but making sure that you've identified mediums through which you're able to communicate with these audiences. The second thing would be putting mechanisms in place that protect the privacy and identity of your sources. We found that to be key in encouraging people to share more information. Once they understand that, yes, I will share my data with an Ushahidi deployment, but my name will not be displayed, or my personal identifying information will only be accessible to a finite group of people. And there's also transparency around why that data is even needed and how it will be handled. And one of the most important one, the third way we've tried to address these challenges, is setting up partnerships to ensure that the feedback loop is getting closed. That when someone shares their data or shares a particular action where something needs to happen, that there's somebody on the other end who will respond to it. We found that to be the key in establishing trust and showing people that their voices actually matter. Seeing that when I shared this text message about there not being medicine in my healthcare center, that after that it was restocked. And that would then encourage other people to come in and share more information.
Exactly. So seeing the results, in general, people get inspired in two ways. One is through stories, and through is to actually seeing the results of their own actions. Okay, actually, my opinion actually made an impact in the problems that were affecting me, my family, and my community.
Exactly.
That is for sure a very important one. And I also think it's very important, another point that you mentioned about choosing the right channels.
Yes.
To communicate the message about what Ushahidi is doing and how can they contribute for that. And the channels in Kenya could be ones, in South Africa could be others, in Australia will be others. So each player having that awareness, depending on the country that they are, or even inside the same country, whether you're in a city or in a small village. So that was a very interesting point that you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Okay, so second point, this is related to the type of insights that you get from the data. So what kind of insights can you get from the data collected? You can think about either the example that we talked about or a different one. And what type of processes does the data go through in general? So that, as you said, it starts from rubbish to something that is has more insights.
Absolutely. So let me actually switch the order of the questions and start with the processes the data goes through from collection, and then getting to the final insights, and then give you a couple of examples. So as I'd mentioned before, currently you're able to collect data via SMS, email, Twitter, smartphone applications, and web on the Ushahidi platform. And we're also launching DSSG as a data source later this quarter. Now, the data management process will vary from context to context. For example, mapping out the cost of chicken will require a less rigorous process in comparison to documenting human rights violations or electoral malpractices. So typically, if the data is coming in from SMS, email, or Twitter, it's in its raw form, right? Which means that it then needs to be structured to conform to the indicators or pieces of information that are relevant to the project. And then from there, you might need to check and see, is it in a language that is understandable by all audiences? So does it actually need to be translated? And then one key aspect that we found that is really key for many of these deployments is setting up a verification process as well before you get to publishing. Just recognizing the fact that when you're collecting data from the general public, there's a risk of bias. Right now, there's the risk of fake news and misinformation. And for you as a deployer or the person who's managing such a project, you have a huge responsibility to ensure that you're not making the situation worse. And so your verification mechanism will vary. For us during the Kenyan election, it was a mix of corroboration of information, having trusted sources on the ground. But right now, as we move into more automated ways, there are different things that you can do that we're trying to think about. And so, once you have moved from the collection of the data, the structuring, the translation, the verification, and publishing, one of the things that the first steps of then trying to draw out insights is deployers have the option of grouping the data into relevant differentiators, or downloading the data sets and performing additional analysis functions to then produce reports using different visualizations. We have some basic functionality built into it, but we also have a robust application programming interface that then allows, makes it much easier for you to plug in with other, whether it's business intelligence tools or other analysis tools. And then from there, you're then able to produce those reports and have discussions around them. Now, in terms of insights from the data, it varies depending on the goal of the project. For example, with the Kenyan election in 2017, as most of you are aware, we held elections twice. We had elections in August of 2017, and then again in October as a result of the presidential results being annulled. And one of the key insights we're able to draw from there was just, being able to see the trends in terms of, activity of the platform, people sharing their opinions. There was a spike on election day, right? And so that in itself just, was a quick indicator for us that this was happening on election day. For one of the other projects that I mentioned before, which is the Dreams Innovation Challenge, we were working closely with NGOs that were working to keep girls in school or give them a bridge to employment or give them access to essential medicine. And, some of them were running training programs. And before using the platform, one of the major challenges was, a high attrition rate, and they weren't able to understand why that was the case. So, once they're able to then get feedback directly from the girls, some were able to realize, oh, it might actually be a factor of, is it distance? Is it lack of access to the medicine? And then that ended up influencing their decision making on how to then adapt their programmatic interventions. For other projects around corruption mapping, I know in kind of what this was Macedonia or Morocco, it actually did lead to some prosecutions based on there being documented evidence of people who were then, giving bribes and things like that. So it'll vary depending on what the goal of the project is.
Exactly. And then in that last example, it shows exactly how credible the data collected in Ushahidi is. Yes. There was one question related to one topic that you already were kind of mentioning, which is related with the topic of fake news, because the more information that we are collecting, the more difficult it is to control. Okay, the information that is 100% accurate and so on. Yeah. Is this a current challenge for Ushahidi? Is this something that you plan to solve in the future? Is it something that you already started to set up some processes to fight it? What is the current situation?
This is actually a problem that has been around for us probably since the beginning. Like, as I mentioned before, while there's benefit in being able to get everybody's opinions, there's a huge risk of bias. And, with the advent of technology and it being very accessible to people, we have several bad actors who are then coming in and targeting fake information or misinformation to then influence certain outcomes. So while we've not been able to build something within the technology itself, as I mentioned, what we've been trying to do is a mix of both, controls within the platform such that nothing goes live until it's been verified from, the administrative side. But then we also have to work with a few, offline tactics. And one of the most successful ones has been developing or working with a trusted network of people, a trusted network of respondents or people who are sharing information. So, for example, in the Kenyan election, we had a partnership with the Constitution Reform and Education Consortium, and they had feet on the ground at least in every single constituency and every single polling station. So whenever we received information from specific areas, then we're able to call and corroborate whether this was something that was true or not. But of course, we are also, cognizant of, we do have to move with the times, and we have to find ways of automating this. So there have been a couple of R&D projects that we've been looking into that would then help us figure out ways of trying to automate it. But I think the caution there is that I don't think that this is something that we will ever be able to fully automate, especially given, how sensitive the situation tends to be. It'll still require some human context and intervention to make sure that we know that this is true and this isn't true.
Exactly. And I think one point that you mentioned that was very important is that this concern started from the very first moment of the creation of Ushahidi. Not right now we talk about fake news and the importance of having accurate data, but the fact that the organization already thought about that even in the first moment where it was created, that is already a great step. And I agree with you that there might be needed the collaboration between local players, local trusted players, and some automated processes.
Yes.
And we are very excited to hear what is next.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have 3 minutes till the end of this talk. I just wanted to ask you if you have any advice or any any recommendation for any other NGO that either is starting to become more data driven or is already taking the first steps in what they could possibly do to become more data driven.
All right. I think just circling back to some of the points I had made in my talk, I think one of the biggest ones is make sure that you have, the ordinary citizens or your beneficiaries at the heart of everything that it is you're doing, right? Because it's that feedback or the data that you're collecting from them that will then help to influence your decision making. It'll also require you to make sure that you really understand what motivates them, what tools do they have access to, just that you're able to then innovate around the best way of adapting and providing this data in a way that they'll then be able to understand. I think that's one of the biggest ones. Have your audience or the ordinary citizens at the center of everything, because that will then help you define the kind of data that you need to collect. It will help you define the kinds of tools you need to build to collect the data or to communicate insights from it. And one other thing is to also be very transparent around the goals and how exactly you're going to be making use of the data you're collecting from these people, because you ultimately have a huge responsibility to do no harm and protect your sources.
Exactly. So it's a double mission. It's the mission of providing social impact, but also to being ethical in how you use that data.
Absolutely.
All right. I think you gave very three interesting tips, and it's a pleasure for me and for the entire team and for the audience to have you here talking about Ushahidi. We hope we can count on you in a future time. And now I just wanted to thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this was helpful. In case you have any questions, feel free to reach out. That's my Twitter handle, but my email is just my first name @ushahidi.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions.